Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about, in a roundabout way, the heroic life. This is the video that I was going to do last week, but it got bumped by covering the racist hiring practices of Disney, which was something that was a bit time sensitive. But really, my channel is about heroics. My channel is about the true definition of hero. It's not really about entertainment. I just cover entertainment a lot because that's an entertaining way to discuss the idea of hero. And that's sort of what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you a big spiel, which is basically a story. It's my own interpretation of how the future will unfold. And yes, I know my predictions of the future have not been stellar, but at the same time, it's not about the predictions of the future. It's about living the heroic life and how I see that playing out, especially within the next decade or two when we divest ourselves of this useless part of the population, which is your quote unquote progressive movement. But before we get there, and speaking of heroes, I just want to let everyone know that there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, 1 return to form for low fantasy, Crom the Destroyer. These are stories built around the traditional idea of hero. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background right now, and at the end of this video, I will be playing a trailer for one of my graphic novels so that you get more of a sense of what it's about and what it looks like. But I do ask that if you are, like me, enthralled by the idea of an actual hero, that you click on one of those links in the description and you go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. Okay, so back to our topic, and as I said, as a storyteller myself, I'm going to start off with a story. Not my own story, but one that comes to mind when I'm discussing in my own head this topic about a useless percentage of the population, which again is your quote-unquote progressive movement. And that story is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Those books, by the way, are comedy for those people who are not familiar with Douglas Adams. But within that science fiction world that he portrays, humanity, the people who live on planet Earth, are really aliens from another planet, a very highly advanced and highly cultured planet. And what this planet did was it eventually found that it had about 1/3 percentage of its population who were completely useless. These were people that they define as, what were they? Hairstylists and account executives and telephone sanitizers. So they, as a highly advanced society, decided things would work much better if we got rid of this 1/3 of this useless part of the population. So what they did was they created these out there stories about the destruction of their planet so that they could convince these useless people to get on these giant spaceships and go to another planet because their planet was going to be destroyed. And once they did that, well, those spaceships were all automatically programmed to go crash on another planet because they didn't care what happened to this useless percentage of the population, and that useless percentage of the population crashed on Earth, and so we are all the descendants of a useless group of people. And by the way, I just have to mention this because where my own video goes, what happened to that planet, original planet where these people were from? Well, everyone eventually died being wiped out by a virulent disease contracted by a dirty telephone. But again, this is comedy. Now, I start off with that story because I believe we have gotten to that point within our own world. We have 1/3 of the population who are basically useless. Now, I should define my terms. What do I mean by useless? Because I, as a person, think that everyone has inherent worth, everyone has inherent dignity, and it is equal in every person. So, no, I don't mean that you can get rid of some people because they are completely useless. What I mean is they're useless in the sense that they simply cannot get anything done. Why? Well, because logically and rationally, the only way that you can get things done is to recognize reality as it is, to try to understand how reality plays out, how the rules of reality affect your life and what you're trying to do, then work with those rules in order to create something. That is the only way, rationally and logically, you can create anything or even advance in your own life. It is to work with the rules of reality, because if you try to work against them, you will fail every time. Well, I suppose I should say that a broken clock is right twice a day, but that's about the extent of how much you're actually going to be able to engage in anything that is going to be fruitful at all. And that's what we have with these quote unquote progressive people. That's why they are useless. It is because they not only have a warped sense of reality, but they completely deny, according to their own ideology, that reality itself exists. Or really, to be more clear, they deny that objective reality exists. Their ideology, if you take it back to its origin point, is that only subjective reality exists. That's why everything, that includes the reality around you, is a social construct. That's why these people believe that they can define what gender they are. They can define what species they are. They can define what race they are, because there's no objective reality. If they feel like they are something that they are objectively not, then that's reality, and that's the only reality that actually matters. So these people deny any objective reality. And as I was talking about those rules of reality, those are all rules that are generated from objective reality. So if their ideology automatically denies at its root objective reality, they cannot be useful in creating any situation that is actually going to be fruitful. And thus, they are a useless part of the population. Again, not to say that they don't have inherent worth, don't have inherent dignity. They do. Every human being does, and it's equal. It's simply that their actions are not fruitful in any way. Therefore, they are useless in helping create anything substantial. Sure, they can go off on massive flights of fancy and create a subjective reality of a story that may seem interesting for a little bit, but when they start to bring that into real life, that's when things go south. Now, that leads to the question of why in the world do we have this useless 1/3 of the population to begin with? Well, I would say, for my own estimation, it is because we have gotten to such a point of human advancement, certainly within the last 100 years, wherein it would only take somewhere between half to 2/3 of the population that we currently have in order to create everything that we would need, and I stress that word need, for humanity to still exist. Therefore, when we started to have these people who technically don't have anything useful to do, we gave them useless jobs. And right now, many jobs are completely useless. They simply consist in person one taking something from point A to point B, and then person B taking that same thing back from point B to point A. That's what their jobs consist of. They don't create anything new. They don't make anything that is going to better society. They're simply given busy work to do. Otherwise, they're going to have a little bit too much time on their hands, and society is probably going to be much the worse for it. That's what kind of economy has been built over the last 100 years. This, of course, affects so much, certainly science fiction that we have seen over the last 100 years, because you have these ideas of a perfect utopian society in the future where everyone, since we are freed from the shackles of trying to do all the things we need to do to live, everyone then becomes free enough in order to alleviate all of the problems of mankind, because they believe that people will actually do that. People will go in that direction if they're given free time. But we know from the last 100 years that that's simply not true. The more and more free time you give to people, the more and more they're simply going to find useless things to fill up their time with. This, by the way, I would say is the reason why we have this new emerging idea about artificial intelligence and robotics. It's people saying, hey, wait a second, I wanted robots and artificial intelligence to do all of the menial tasks of life so that I could create and write poetry. I didn't want artificial intelligence and robots so that they could create and make poetry so that I, as a person, could be more concentrated on the menial things of life. Because that's what we see around us right now. That's what's happening with artificial intelligence. And I think, well, at least for me, it's pretty self-evident why in the world this is happening. It's happening because artificial intelligence is taking over the useless jobs. Why? Because if you write bad poetry, nothing's going to happen. If you tell bad stories or create awful art, really, it's not going to change a whole lot. And I'll have to admit right here, as a storyteller, I believe that storytelling is an essential part of what we as human beings need in order to gain human fulfillment. So it does have a useful purpose. But again, there are plenty of directions that it can go in that becomes completely useless. And so, again, you have artificial intelligence taking over these useless jobs because, of course, these useless things, if they are screwed up, doesn't really matter. If you give a useful job to artificial intelligence, like, say, growing crops, and it turns out spectacularly poorly, then people starve. If you give a job to them like designing and creating buildings and they do it poorly, then people die when the thing falls down on their head. So that's why the useless or semi-useless or closer to useless jobs within society, like creating art, like creating stories, like writing poetry, they're all going to go away and be taken over by artificial intelligence, by robots, because they are useless or closer to useless than what we as human beings need. Now, here's where I start to get into, and I repeat that, start to get into the silver lining to this entire thing. Now, there is, well, it's not really an axiom, it's more like a rule of thumb that I ran across when I was doing my degrees within university. It's the idea, when you look at history, that if a people need to fight for something, that thing is already lost. And it basically harkens back to, again, a lazy human nature. And it applies that lazy human nature to your everyday life. And it says, well, if you truly believed that this thing was important to begin with, you would have got off your backside and done something about it when it could be fixed. But now you see, finally, because it's been shoved in your face, because you're so lazy, because we are so lazy, that it is going to disappear, then you start to fight for it. But it's too late. And again, the silver lining here is, I believe we've gotten to that point with this useless percentage of the population, and that's what your quote-unquote progressivism is. I talked about this in terms of feminism just a couple of weeks ago. Feminism, as an extension of this quote-unquote progressive movement, is a section of the population trying to eat their cake and have it too. It's women who technically, throughout history, were always a privileged class. I say this as someone who has a degree in history. Yeah, me reading original sources from history, that is what it is. And your quote-unquote progressivism, it tries to teach you the exact opposite of that because for them, black is white and white is black. They try to make themselves the victims and say, no, we're the oppressed class. When, no, I'm sorry, you look throughout history, you look at today, women are always a privileged class within society. But the reason why we have feminism is because this privileged class decided that at some point they wanted to have the same equal footing as men on all grounds, except for the grounds of actually taking responsibility for having that equal footing to men. Because if they were truly to take that and apply it so that they're equal, then they lose their privileged status. And that's what feminism is all about. It's about, no, we have to be equal with men, but still retain our privileged status. And that's what feminism fights for. Because, again, this thing that they're fighting for, I'm sorry, it's too late. You've gotten to the point where you're fighting for it because you took advantage of this thing, this situation, and you rested on your laurels thinking that that was going to be enough. You were given equal status, but then you realized, equal status means I have to actually be equal with men, and therefore that means giving up my privileged status. Therefore, let's fight for this. We need our privileged status, and we do that by calling black white and white black, by saying, yes, we are oppressed. We are the ones that are in the minority status. Men are the privileged ones. And that's the exact pattern of progressivism itself. You have these people, these useless people who do absolutely nothing to advance humanity. Even though, again, as in their minds, black is white and white is black, they think of themselves as the pinnacle of advancement of humanity. No, you want to drag us backwards into darkness, back into ignorance. That's what progressives want to do. But they want to do that because, again, they're fighting for their privileged part within society of being able to exist within a life where you technically don't do anything useful. And again, For me, I would say the silver cloud is the reason why they're fighting so hard for progressivism right now is because the jig is up. People realize that, wait a second, what you do is completely useless. The end is nigh for this kind of thinking. Quite honestly, I would say that we stopped fighting world wars a long time ago, but we're still fighting the same ideological world war that started within 100 years ago. That ideological world war which we are fighting is coming to a head right now with what we see around us. And, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, we're never going to get rid of this within humanity itself. And this is something that is extremely old, even in the iteration that we see right now. I would say we are looking at this entire thing coming to a head from actions starting back as early as, at least 800 years ago. Now again, this is my own take on the entire thing, but I would say scholasticism, which I think would have its height about 800 to 600 years ago, reached such heights of human reason and logic based upon reality that it began to trap the then useless part of society into these logical boxes where they simply could not deny reality anymore and still claim to be rational. So what did they do? Well, they decided in order to continue to be selfish, in order to continue to be useless, then they would deny reality itself. And that was really the beginning of the entire thing. And I do really mean that about scholasticism. If you look at something like Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, and, oh, by the way, there are many other summas out there written by other scholastic authors as well. This is just the best known one. But the Summa Theologica is a giant tome. My copy of it has, I think, 5 volumes. And these are large books, each having over 1,000 pages each, with this tiny little print. And quite honestly, what that entire thing is a giant logical proof. That's why I have to laugh at people who try to go and pick a point right out of the middle of it and say, well, this is completely wrong. This is not logically correct. And then they give you a quote unquote logical argument of why this point in the middle of the book is not logically correct, when I'm sorry, but the entire thing is one logical proof. If you want to discount that thing within the middle of the book, you got to start at the first and show me why all of those preceding logical points are also not logically consistent. You can't do that? Well, and then I'm sorry, your logical proof doesn't mean anything. And, oh, by the way, I should also mention that this giant tome, this giant logical proof is, according to Thomas Aquinas' own introduction of the book, a manual for beginners. Okay, I'm starting to get off on a sidetrack, but really, for me, this would be the origin, at the very least, the current origin of the entire problem, because the selfish nature, once again, of humanity was trapped by this giant intellectual, rational, and logical proof that, yes, you should act in a good manner. And they said, well, no, we don't want to act in a good manner. Therefore, we need to deny the very basis of the argument itself, which is logic and reason, which itself is based on reality. So we deny reality. And what we see around us again, we see around us today the ultimate fruits of that denial of reality within progressivism. But again, silver lining is that they are having to fight so hard for progressivism right now because they've already lost. And again, personally, I would say the reason why this is all coming to a head now is because of information technology, is because everyone is connected enough now with the ability to see how things are around the world that you cannot, at the very least in the old fashion, continue to convince people of these lies which allow progressivism to appear as if it has any actual merit. Certainly not if you want to claim to be A, logical and rational, or B, want to have a good life, which is the product of thinking about human fulfillment in a logical and rational way, which is the definition of natural law. But where does heroism come into this entire thing? Well, the fact is that we've now gotten to this point where progressivism and its denial of reality has so taken over not just society itself, but many corners within our own minds. Because I'm not just pointing the finger at those people, saying they have all the problem with them, let's get rid of them, and therefore we'll have a better society. No, I'm saying that many of us, many of us have many ideas stuck within our head which are completely useless, which are a denial of reality itself. But we've gotten to that point, that fourth turning, if you will, wherein the good times are over. And when the good times are over, people are forced to look at reality. Again, for those who don't know, the fourth turning is basically good men bring good times bring bad men bring bad times bring good men. The fourth turning is when bad men bring bad times. And I would even venture to say that we are not only within the smaller fourth turning, but we're in the very large turning of this entire thing, possibly turning around, possibly the end, finally, of this ideological world war that we have been locked in for, at the very least, the last century. And the reason why this will be such a turning is because that forcing to make people look at reality is going to be backed up by something else which is happening in the world as well. It is demographic decline. We know it has already begun in some countries like Korea and Japan, but it's pretty much every Western country. Now, America is about at the end of that spectrum. They're the ones that will hold on the longest, but this demographic decline will hit within the next 20 years every Western and every first world country. It will be, for the first time in recorded history, where the population of humanity will begin to be less and less every year instead of more and more every year. And even if we turn the entire thing around right now, it would still hit. But we are not going to turn the entire thing around right now because, again, people still have stuck in their minds so many of these useless ideas. But here's the thing, wherein many people are looking at this immediate future and starting to panic, I'm looking at it and going, this is actually an opportunity. Now, many people are panicking because they see that, well, if you start to decline the number of people that actually make up your society, then the economy is also going to decline. Then you're going to have worse and worse hard times. And stick right on top of that the fact that they've tried over the last 10 to 15 years to solve this entire problem by taking third world people and importing them into the first world to say, well, then that's going to be our new population, and therefore it will solve the entire problem. Basically taking third world people, making them into a slave class in order to do the actual jobs, the jobs that first world people don't want to do. But we've learned over the last 10 years that that simply doesn't work. You can't take third world people, plant them in a first world nation, and expect them to simply turn into first world people. No, what's going to happen is you take those third world people, plant them in a first world country, and that country becomes the third world. And that's the only solution that our governments have right now, and it doesn't work. Therefore, this thing is going to hit. But again, when you look at all of the data and all the speculation about this, they talk about the last boom within our society, within the growth of the population, and they start from that point and usually go forward. Now, that point in a lot of the analysis of this is usually around 1968. That's when you see around the world the major booms within population that increase until we get to today. But here's my point. They're saying, of course, when people start to decline, then the economy is going to start to decline, and then we're going to have some really hard times. But I'm thinking to myself, what? Your base proposition that really hard times is the late 1960s, early 1970s? I'm sorry, no. I lived through the early 1970s. And yeah, looking back on it as historical events, even connecting those things to my own personal life, I would say, hey, they were hard times, but I didn't notice it. Why? Because I was growing up, and to me, that was just life. And really, going back to the early 1970s and having to live that way economically, yeah, it's really not that much of a hardship. Sure, you'll have to give up a lot of your modern conveniences that have developed over the last 50 years, but really, It's not that much of a fall from grace. But it certainly will be an opportunity to get rid of this useless percentage of the population. Why? Because if times get hard, and then hard times get really hard, then the actual sense of community will have to be reintroduced into our societies. Because for the last 50 years, we've becoming more and more atomistic within our individual lives. If you want resources on that, go back and read something like Bowling Alone. It's a fairly good book written in the 80s about this exact thing. But the point is that if things get really, really hard, then you are going to be forced to concentrate on solutions to problems that have merit. You yourself, as an individual, will have to work with the rules of reality in order to produce something in order for you to keep your head above water. And not only that, but the person next to you cannot gum up the works by doing something completely useless and working in the opposite direction of you. And societies are going to take these people who gum up the works and say, sit down, shut up, and get out of the way. And again, where does heroism come into this entire thing? Well, as I said at the first, I focus on the traditional idea of a hero as a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are very specific in number and order, but they depend on something else at their forefront. And what is that? That is right reason. And what is right reason? It is your reason in accord with reality, which is the exact same thing I've been talking about. If you want to have a fruitful exercise in trying to produce something, you need to work with the rules of reality, objective reality. And that is also the origin of the heroic life. And if we are going to have a society where you need to concentrate on being productive in this way, and you don't want to get beaten down by a system of oppression, where do you go? You go towards heroism. You take your inspiration from heroism. It's not, I've become a slave to these horrible conditions. It's that I have stepped up to this heroic life, and I will sacrifice what is necessary in order to get things done. Sacrifice, by the way, which is not sacrificing others like your quote-unquote progressivism does in order to advance itself, but sacrificing yourself. That is what heroic individuals do. Whereas dealing with the hard times will weed out the useless part of the population, so it is that heroism will weed out within our own lives the useless parts of our own thinking. And this is why, as I stated earlier as well, that I believe that story itself is not useless. Why? Because it can present in a broad structure the outline of that heroic life in order for you to live out what it means to be heroic so that you yourself can be heroic in your own life. And that is why I believe that within the next 20 years of our existence, the idea of hero will become prominent and necessary within our societies. Because if you don't want to be beaten down by this service, you need to take inspiration in the self-sacrificial heroic ideals. Will it be easy? No. Will it be perfect? No. But at the very least, it will divest us of enough of this uselessness that we see around us that we, as a society, will once again become a shining city on a hill. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels that are based upon the traditional idea of a virtuous hero using merit-based methods to give you, the audience, the best story, not only possibly that we can muster, but that you ask for. And as I said, I'm going to play a very short trailer at the very end of this video to give you more indication of what my graphic novels are like. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.